Here we are once again. It's the Lean Into Artcast, a show where a couple visual storytellers get together, take a walk around a topic, look at a topic, poke at a topic, maybe even do a little bit of dissection of the topic, and then see if we have anything to learn from looking at this topic so closely. my, my name is Jersey Droz. I'm a cartoonist and teaching artist. The other host is...
Hey, I am Rob Stenzinger. I'm a designer, coder.
Sorry, clumsy intro. It's been I had a week off and I come back and I'm just like rusty joints, Rob. Rusty joints.
Oh, what? It's like you've not been gone. I mean, yeah, you took last week off, but it's a rare thing.
Thank you, by the way, for taking the reins, getting a guest co-host. It's always fun listening to the show, not being a part of the show, and getting the experience that everybody else gets.
Yeah, I mean, it's I agree. It is nice taking time off from time to time, and then hearing the show and what happens. Then sometimes I'm like, oh, I kind of wish I could ask a question now. So, oh well. But no, it is good, and then that's one of those things where we're getting better at planning that and taking that time, because it's about sustainability of a project.
Yeah, sure. Load balancing. But I should say, I do get a weekly fix of listening to this show without me, and that is the Art and Science Punks podcast, which I have to talk about again. This fabulous show that Rob puts together with his partner for life, Kate. And I, honest and for true, was just having a conversation today with somebody who leaned into me and said, like, have you been listening to Art and Science Punks? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, isn't Kate the best? I'm like, yeah. and we both were kind of getting a little overexcited about the gentle way that she pokes and prods at you on the show, and like not least of which is like when she calls you Robbie. But there's all these little like ways that she's being impish on the show to like push you in different directions, to like lead the conversation in different ways and round back on conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great, if you enjoy Lean Into Art, I'm telling you guys, you need to listen to Art and Science Punks. Rob, what's the address for that show?
Yeah, the address for the show is artsciencepunks.fireside.fm. And thanks, Jersey. I really, it's I'm a fan of your other shows as well. So it's fun thank you for that. And it's, Kate is a fantastic host, and it's a totally different experience. Lean Into Art. I mean, okay, the really exceptionally odd thing was during the same week doing an Art and Science Punks with Kate, and then doing and vice versa in order, doing Lean Into Art, where she was a guest co-host a few weeks back. Yet each has their totally different feel, right? I mean, Lean Into Art. I mean, we've crafted this approach that you described right in the beginning, the whole purposefully enjoying looking into a topic, and the process of doing that, and not being shy to dig in deeper, ask why, not know an answer, and get stumped, and just work through it. That's a fun process, and that I think we've got our brand of that, our flavor, our special recipe.
Neil deGrasse Tyson was recently on the Wait, Don't Tell Me NPR show, and they did like a quiz game with him, and he lost he got one of the questions wrong, and then everybody made their joke about, oh, you're such a smart guy. Does that make us smarter than you? Because we knew and you didn't. And he said, like, no, it means that I got the pleasure of learning something new. Like not knowing something means you get to learn something. It's like check and checkmate. Yeah, but
so yes, awesome.
Not knowing something is pretty cool as long as you get to learn something new. Yeah. There you summed up the show. That's what we're about to do. That's what we're about to dig into. Okay. What are we talking about this week, Rob?
Well, we're talking about I think on a project basis, this sort of, how do you find an art style where it's part you, it's part the thing you're working on, and what comprises that too? Like, what are the elements? And I suppose, how do you piece it together?
Right. So like when you say art style, you're talking about like just like the way you compose the images, what kind of tools do you use? Do you work in black and white? Do you work in color? Is it, something in the visual rhythm of the piece that you use? Is it something in like the specific color palette that you use? Is it something about the eye that you have, like the storytelling eye? Everybody talks about Citizen Kane and like where the cameras were put and whatnot.
Hmm.
What do we mean by that? Interesting angle putting the project by project thing on it, uh, constraint to this discussion.
Or
Um,
and there may be a collective as well, right? I hold on. I'm going to break out of this corner. But I do think that the envelope, the concern of like, well, a project implies a particular goals and um, a why, like why am
mhm.
I doing this? And then that I think has a lot of shaping forces and factors. So that's where I'd like to think of project, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's sort of the collective thing too, because okay, when you say your style, like do you think it's sort of the summary, the artist like statement for your gallery expo?
Oh, I mean, this is where you're hitting me flat-footed because I don't know if I have that. I mean, I have like a statement on my Instagram, like I like to draw cute things being brave, right? Like that's sort of uh, my wheelhouse or whatever. It's the place where I feel most comfortable, the place where I feel happiest as an artist. But that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really summarize a visual look.
Mm.
Um, so no, I don't know if I have like an overall like package. And this is something I've talked about with other artists over the years, and it's something where I find a lot of young artists kind of struggling with is this sense of I don't know if this is stop me if this is 10,000 feet up, Rob, because I know we got to go on the ground first. Um,
It's like bonus intro.
bonus intro, yeah. um, there's an assumption that I find a lot of artists, myself included, paying attention to or adhering to, is this idea that you have to have sort of a packaged version of yourself, and that style is a way to market yourself and to be competitive, right? If you're looking for this, you come to me, right? I have this certain look and feel, and if it's appropriate for your project, you're going to come to me for that. I'm reminded of something that I remember hearing Cary Grant once said about his acting was that like he viewed it as a product, and like there's like a certain Cary Grantness that he provides to the role, and it's not so much about inhabiting a character as much as applying his product to that character, right? And that was what made him as marketable as an actor. Nobody else could have that, right? So I find like young artists like, oh, I gotta find a style, I gotta find a style. And then I talk to other artists who are more malleable and they can like adapt to whatever the project requires. They can do like a more angular style or a smoother style or a more softer color palette or a harsher color palette or noir, hard blacks and hard whites. Um, and then they say, well, I don't really have a style. I can do whatever is necessary, right? Does that make them less marketable, right? So, you know, I guess the first question that I have, and again, we can save this as like a teaser for the 10,000 feet up, is it even necessary to have, like, how necessary is it to have that summary statement for your style?
Mm. It's a great question. Let's explore it throughout this episode.
Okay. So we'll come around to that. We're going to spin
Mhm.
around. We're going to do a circling pattern. So does that mean that it's time to go? Do we want to just like talk about some of the different works that we've done and the kind of styles we've used as a starting point for the on the ground part?
Yeah, I love it. Let's go into it to some specific examples.
All right, so then let's go to. Oh, I need some music to get us over there. Ah, on the ground, foot soldiers, boots on the ground, as they say. Let's talk about like the stuff we've made and what we used to make it, why we did that, why we chose that. Where do you want to start, Rob? Want to start with one of yours?
Sure. So, there was a comic I worked on a few years back that we've referred to from time to time, and that was a web comic called Art Geek Zoo, and um, I have compiled the main four chapters in this book called Art Geek Zoo Volume One: Hidden Talent, and it's a complete story. But like it's I mean inherently in it, you see that it's okay, the book is laid out horizontally, right? Here's the
Mm-hmm.
back, there's the front. And then you go, okay, great. There's an intro page and chapter introduction, but then wait a minute, it goes straight into whoop vertical. And that's the first chapter. And it's and there's a variety of particular tools and constraints that I chose. I was that as far as why I chose them, I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to go with pretty much any of it, other than it was time to start getting a story out of my head. And the whole contract of putting out at one or more episodes or pages of a story per week that was in the whole webcomic model, I thought this is perfect. I will. It's like a chance to develop and ship and release one thing at a time, and the one thing being a page. And I sort of just went with sort of standards and like, okay, I tend to think of the either the North American floppy size of a comic as being a layout constraint, or like maybe I'll shrink it down a little bit to be more graphic novel size. I don't know, right? So I'm going to work within that aspect ratio. And initially, um, and I just went with a lot of different tools and whatnot. So I literally can't even say that there was like a prescribed style, right? The intent was to ship and to embrace the constraints of the frequent shipping. So that project, throughout its time, I would get, complete a chapter and then decide it's time to really iterate. And so I would decide, well, what feels right based on the practices I'm seeing and the kind of comics I'm reading. And so then I went from vertical to horizontal. And then the big jump from horizontal vertical to horizontal happened later when I went in. Now you see that horizontal got broken up into two um, strip updates, right? And so a lot of this was just uh, a continuous adaptation and deciding what makes sense now. And that would there's so many elements. Like I started out, well, I have to use my own font and I have to use tools that I'm familiar with. So I started with Adobe Flash, and then I switched. And so then I went from Flash to Photoshop to Illustrator to Photoshop and Illustrator and whatever. Literally, this is the most super chaotic project, but I learned a ton by doing it. So honestly, I would say maybe learning is my constraint and shipping something frequently is my constraint. So um,
This rings with what Troy Shadowing Tronics is saying in the chat. He says, my various styles are based on impatience versus wanting to do a good job. Went for a minimalist style just above doodling, plus one I can do talking. Plus one I can do talking head strips fast. So there's this desire to produce and sort of being unafraid to learn along the way. You're pulling up some
exactly.
strips.
And so I eventually I landed on an aesthetic that had a few aspects of polish to it, where um, I chose a sort of again consistent layout, and um, then I elected the tools for the jobs that I felt strongest in. So I would letter in Illustrator and do the art in probably an analog format, then cut and paste it and do different things to get it in the correct um, design in Photoshop, and then go through the rough pencils and ultimately cleaned up line art and whatnot in brushes and things that I felt comfortable in Photoshop at the time. And then I would do this essentially a color and lighting phase, and then I would do a little bit of additional contrast, and then final balloons. But like, I mean, every update took me probably 12 hours, right? 12, and then if I was lucky, I could somehow lump in 2 updates in 19 hours because there was some benefit to working on 2 at a time. And but I had the budget to do it, so um, yeah, I was constantly chasing like, what am I capable of doing? What do I have time to do? And as I increased in skill, I would spend it, right? I would
Yep.
be like,
Yep.
I yeah, and so there's this constant, that was part of the adapting and learning. Um, so
Sounds very similar to some of my experiences. Let's go
yeah,
take
how about
a
you? Like
yeah.
what's an example for your
Well, let's go back to
past project?
1996. I think I've shown this on the show before, have I not? Or
That's
no?
right, and it has the title Stranger Things.
Hmm.
What?
Stranger Things was a comic that it was a comic proposal that I did with Tom Root back in 1996, and I had been, you know, doing a little bit of my own self-publishing stuff up to this point. I mean, I think my first self-published comic book that was like actually like I distributed through traditional distribution channels was 1994. So this is only a couple years later, but uh, I still, I was still pretty raw. I was a young man, and was, and I know I've told this story a bunch of times on different shows that I've done, but I was deathly afraid of inking tools because ink is permanent. Pencil somehow felt much more approachable to me. And so the style that I had at that time, if you want to call it that, is really me desperately trying to get pencils to do what ink pens did or brushes did, trying to mimic these effects. Um, so this is all just pencil. This is all pencil that I just, photocopied and, adjusted the levels so that, the uh, contrast
So it's, yeah,
was
it's high
pretty
contrast. It
high.
looks like pen to me, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you get up close, you can see that like the lines on her sneaker here have fixed width on them pretty much. So I was using on top of it, I was using a mechanical pencil. Whoops.
Okay.
Um, Now, so this was again starting with tools that I was comfortable with, and I wasn't thinking terribly hard about layout yet, as far as like part of my style. Because I think that something that I would consider part of my style is I think a lot about layout now. But at this point, I was not. I was mostly thinking about, can I put the viewer's eye in interesting places, uh, and can I draw it right?
Okay.
um,
So it's interesting. So I mean, so partially I'm hearing like you weren't thinking about layout, but I'm seeing a lot of, I mean, are you saying that they were unintentional
oh,
sort
if I
of,
did anything good with the layout, it was completely by accident.
really?
I don't think I had an eye for it at this point.
Huh. Because I mean, there's a lot of like, go back a couple pages where you had that character and a lot of that one. Boom.
Oh,
Whoop.
oh,
Yeah.
the dream sequence.
Yeah, okay, the dream sequence. I mean, look at the placement of
Mm-hmm.
following essentially her face, right?
Right.
I mean, that's an interesting pattern, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I'm leading us off the page in the correct direction, right?
Yeah. And exactly, you start out, exactly. It's like you say hi to the reader in the upper left, and you say, "What's happening next? Turn the page on the lower
Right.
part." And if that's reflex, that's some interesting, um, amazing instinct, I would say.
Well, thanks. The young me thanks you. Yeah, and that was probably from, years of reading comics too, but in just like sort of like absorbing the language, as it were,
Mm.
right? Not knowing necessarily the grammar, but understanding that this is the right way to say it. Also, and I want to put a pin in this one for 10,000 feet up. At this point, I was also really aping two of my favorite artists. And a lot of the examples I have are periods where I'm aping somebody else, where it's like, I see something in this person's work that affects me. I don't know why it affects me, so I'm just going to use it in my work because then it will look good. And some of the artists in particular who were influencing me on this continue to be influences today. And I think there's elements of the work that you see here that made it into the way I construct figures and scenes today. But this was me more. This is I want to say inferring what I wanted to do with my style. And that inference came from a comfort zone of certain kinds of tools and responding to something in other artists' work that I liked. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So, do you have another example you want to dive through?
Hmm. Sure. So I have a work in progress where I did not find earlier examples, but I've got a project. Let's call it in development. I've got a few of these that are essentially a combination of a plan for both a story and a game, right? And this is Ghost Brawlers, and at least the working project title. And thinking about the characters and the situations they're dealing with, and the world, and also the art style very much. So there's multiple layers of development going on, and thinking about the team and dynamics within, as far as the the hero characters, and also the kind of things that they face, and why, and then and of course aesthetic. Like, so I have older versions of these characters. If you look at my unblocking project on interactive-storyteller.com/unblocking, that's where a few times that during 2015, that was the year I did a drawing every day and published it. It's not, about having a monumental amount of work, but like I did explore a lot of things that year. And I mean, it was meant as far as it was a touch point saying like, yeah, I want to make something every day. And sometimes the things that I want to make every day are well, they're serving some other particular some project, right? Or technique or whatever, right? But anyway, it's a practice thing. And yeah, at some point in there, I know Ghost Brawlers pop up, and a few different times, like for Inktober, a couple of different years. Last year, let's see, so for sure, 2015, 2016, Inktober, Ghost Brawlers pop up. And there's Jersey's pausing on another project in development that I've gotten quiet about, but it's I call it TPT, it's a project in development. That there has been a lot of work lately for Two Pizza Team. So
That's very exciting.
Yeah, we'll see where that goes. That's literally after I finish. I've got a whatever. Anyway, that's a side tangent, but I've got a demo game in Unity that I intend to finish and ship, and then right after that that's about testing things that I want to use for Two Pizza Team. So, which is both a story and a game. Anyway, so yeah, the whole Ghost Brawlers thing. There's which you probably, so Jersey's like in December. So if you go back to like October-ish, you'll probably find
okay. Scroll faster.
2015. You'll find some Ghost Brawlers stuff, and the things I'm exploring and hunting for, like I haven't landed on the thing. So my intent is for the Ghost Brawlers project to actually have more of a curated consistency to it, right? So a lot of times when you say like, oh, there's a voice and an art style for a given project, it typically isn't about on continuous development and iteration, because most audiences aren't that into their characters they're seeing change that much that frequently, right? And also the well, yeah, so let's see.
Oh, did I have it?
Yeah, you're certainly in the range.
Okay.
Oh, November. Okay, so yeah, I guess you're getting close.
Okay. I'm looking.
Yeah, so let's see. So my intent is to find that, like, so what am I shopping for by doing the different experiments? Well, in addition to story voicing characters and some relationships and getting a feeling for them, it's the the visual style is a huge component. Some of the work I did in October in 2015 and then 2016 and some time around that, like I was working on like, well, how much detail, like how much am I using, like weighted lines? Am I using not weighted lines? Am I using colors with a lot of texture and toning, or is it more flat? And what color palette and all that stuff, right? Where you could think of it as the more of those variables you nail down and try to use consistently, the more it becomes this um, mm, well, I mean, it becomes a an element that is reliably present for the audience, right? So it's, and from what I've seen and casually observed, it seems like projects that have that sort of tightened down aesthetic do um they have a chance for wider appeal. So here you go. There's a haunted house. You see the little um the little ghosts that are spirits that
Mm-hmm.
I experiment with ghost brawlers. It's a pretty simple shape. It's like a teardrop or a little fire, um, a little blade of fire kind of thing, sort of
Yeah.
character. Um, and let's
Are these
see here.
other? Are these? This is just like general
And
Halloween
then
theme, or these?
thematically, yeah. I mean, honestly, I'm poking around in the zone of what are some of the um, denizen type characters that may appear in this in a um, in a ghost brawlers game or story. So again, like so much different shopping going on with
Mm-hmm.
in the pursuit of practice and whatnot. That is becoming um, like your warm up time you can use to develop stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, it adds up. Anyway, there's yeah. How about you, Jersey? You got another project you want to share and explore?
Well, I just want to pin a few things in there too that we can come back round back on in the 10,000 feet up too. Is that the style can come out of, as you described it, shopping or experimentation, and this is something. This is similar to something that I did with some. Well, and I know we talked about this in the show before too. Is like in the lead up to doing Boulder and Fleet, I was as a webcomic, which we'll talk about later on in the show. I spent a good 2 years playing with different art tools and art styles and formats to figure out what would fit in my bandwidth for for an ongoing project. I wonder if I should just go there.
So okay, so the finding a fit, that's a good theme to keep
Yeah.
exploring too,
Okay.
because bandwidth is certainly like what
So
is your capacity to put effort toward this project.
okay, yeah, that's another piece of the puzzle is style as being a function of capacity. And here's an example. So we've talked about this when Jesse Kaufman was on the show. This is from the Captain Seriously project that I do, um, where I make comics for the kids of Southeast Michigan, with like positive pro-social messages, but mostly about like exciting adventures. And I get to create really awesome characters like Dame Lady Cat, who we see here on this page. And this particular visual look and feel was designed for elementary school students. So we're talking third through fifth grade, right? Which I
Mm.
feel like is my personal target audience. That's the audience I most want to serve anyway. So I feel right at home there. But certain things, um, story length was a constraint there because it's like, okay, well, let's keep it a short story. We don't want to do anything too huge. But also the visual look of it, like really saturated, bright colors, bold art that jumps out of the panels, literally jumps out of the panels, And this is something that those little kids actually say to me, like, "This is my favorite panel because it looks 3D." Um, Really fun, lighthearted humor, villains who are scary but not too scary, right? But then we get to, and there's the whole cast of characters in the back of the book. Then we get to the eighth grade book, and everything changes, right? And we had a lot of discussion around this. Is like, what's the
Mhm.
visual, like, what needs to change in order to serve this uh, maturing audience? These kids have grown up with these characters; they're expecting these characters, but what can we do to make it clear to them that it's not the same stuff they've had before? And so we chose black and white. We chose a longer story. Now it's going to be 40 pages instead of 12. And I changed the art style to have this very brittle look, right? Let me go back just so we can do a quick comparison. If you look at this page and look at the smooth lines on Turnbuckle Tutwiler here,
Mhm.
Um, really smooth, strong lines. But then we get to doing the eighth grade book, and suddenly the lines are really crisp and brittle and hard edged, right? Look at the swooshing arc on her swooshing motion with her bow staff there, right? It's not a smooth curve. It's a jagged curve, and this was specifically calculated to be something that would that to well, some language I've been enjoying using in my classrooms lately is like this is the adjectives of comics, where if I say she swung the bow staff fiercely, kinetically, and abruptly, how can I use lines that make us feel that? Does that make sense? Um,
It does.
and so even the lines in the back,
You're
and like,
trying to
and
essentially visualize physics.
yeah, yeah. And if I use a smooth line, that's going to feel graceful. If I use like this jagged, abrupt, incomplete line, now it feels somehow even more anxious, right? So
Urgent,
yeah,
extra powerful, forceful,
and
panicky.
I did a blog post about this. I can't remember where I posted it, but in a way, it's what interested me about developing this style for this particular issue of the Captain Seriously series. Let's find another page. Was it was very similar to what I was trying to accomplish in Stranger Things, which was this kind of brittle, hard-edged kind of look that I was trying to do with pencils. But I didn't quite know what I was doing yet, and I feel like here it is 20 years later, and I'm applying that style with like a little bit more experience and knowledge. Um, and I'm doing it purposefully for the purpose of the audience this time versus and the purposes of the project and the success of the project rather than I've seen this on other art and I like it. So I'm just going to appropriate it, right? Um,
Well, I mean, so you can think of it as purposeful or architected versus emergent and
there we go.
reflexive.
That's a nice way of putting it. Um, and so the black and white choice was both a decision to make it appealing to eighth graders because like wow, it looks so different than before, right? So this ain't your daddy's blah blah blah, as people like to say, which I think is like very unfortunate marketing. But but also it was a function of the constraints of my time, right? Like doing a 40-page full color book in a summer was a difficult proposition. But black and white, that makes it much more manageable. And then I thought, well, what if we did the tones like watercolors or markers to make it feel, whereas, again, this was a very deliberate choice about style. Like this is very cartoony, very bold and stark, and not stark, but just vibrant, I should say.
Oh,
Whereas
vibrant, yeah.
this feels a little bit more subdued and quote unquote sophisticated, maybe.
Mm.
Although I would never describe my work as terribly sophisticated, but but yeah. So and
I
I mean
notice
from
I can see it better with a monocle. And now I know why.
if you straighten your tie and sniff really hard, uh, it reads that much better.
Hmm. It's yeah. Well, I'm okay. Black and white can in the gray tones, and especially when the tones. It's so funny because tone just value of brightness can also have a vibrance to it,
Hmm.
but like you found a way to create a little bit of like the detail adds ambiguity and texture, and it's not this simple thing anymore. Not simple in the um, everything pops.
Hmm.
It does somehow. It's all bright and like there's these clear delineated regions, but like somehow it's like fog. Fog is moody, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. That's a great way of putting it. That's kind of what I was trying to shoot for
I
here.
was
Is
hunting
like
for this.
like so this was more so than past projects. This was me sitting down saying, what was my mindset when I was in eighth grade? What was I reacting to when I was in eighth grade? And when I was in eighth grade, I felt like this was the moment when everybody started talking about there was consequences, right?
Hmm.
It matters all of a sudden what I'm going to be doing with my life and the things that like I'm going to start inheriting all these problems in the world. all right, that's the tone of this book. Our heroes are going to be saddled with a lot of problems that are huge, ambiguous, and not their fault.
Mm.
How can I communicate that tone, right? So the style sort of was in service in this project rather than in the past the style was emergent. I think that's a great way of saying it, how you said it.
Oh, wow.
Although elements that I would consider to be part of my visual vocabulary and style are definitely in here in terms of the way I like to play with composition on the page, the way I like to play with simultaneity in my paneling. Like, for instance, there was a page I was just on a minute ago. Yeah, during this fight sequence, we look at this. Can I draw on this page with the tools in here? I don't know if I can. I don't think I can. Well, maybe. Can I do it like this? Yeah, I'll do this. Here we go. Hey, look at this. I'm going to draw on the page. So if we look at panel 1, you know, our character says this line. Panel 2, he responds to her from this panel, and then she responds from panel 1 in panel 2, right? And then she talks over panel 3. So the reading direction goes like this. And so this art, and this is something I've talked about in a lot of other Lean Into Art casts, it's something I get excited about that comics can do, is I get to reuse this panel multiple times. This panel with her and this first panel here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very anchoring.
Yeah, so like
collective greater moment going on.
That's something I would consider part of my what has emerged as my natural style, no matter what visual style I'm using. That's my narrative style, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And also just celebrating like
that's like
movement.
So what's the gentleman who the movie director of the Star Treks who uses lens flare? That's like your lens flare.
That's the annoying thing that I do in all of my comics. That everybody's like, "Oh, there he goes again."
It was annoying. It's so signature. It's not lens flare.
No, I love it. I love it, Rob, because it is like it's such a thing to like flash at the audience saying, "Don't forget, you're reading a Jersey Joe's comic." I really do like that. I like that a lot. I'm totally gonna use that from now on. That's my lens flare, is simultaneity on the page.
It's yeah, okay, so that's so interesting. I feel like that there's a lot of well, what is your voice then across these different projects, right? Where did you like when do you prioritize the that orchestration and composing those constraints in a way that's so purposeful, and just it becomes the recipe where it's like, no, this is my defendable hypothesis. I think I need to do the story like this.
Yeah. It's my defendable hypothesis. How do you arrive at that? Oh, I feel like that's a tease for the next part of the show, Rob. I feel like you just teased the 10,000 feet up section. So good at this. Okay. So yes, so in about a minute and a half, we are going to talk about how do you arrive at these are the elements that I need to, these are the elements and this is the approach that I need. This is the overall style that is right for this project. Or for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
We'll do our best to get there. Let's say that. We're going to try to get there. But first, we have to thank some people who make this show possible, Rob. How about that?
It sounds awesome.
And what do I mean when I say make this show possible? Are they, starting the YouTube stream for us?
They invented the internet. That was one thing. No.
And then the second thing they did is they supported us on Patreon. And yes. Patreon.com/leanintoart. It's an ongoing support service where you can pledge as little as $1 a month. It's a vote from you saying, hey, this stuff is meaningful to me. I want to see it continue. And we want to take a moment to thank 5 people who have voted in such a way. First up, Rachel Ross. And you can find Rachel at NYCTERIS, like New York City Terrace on Twitter. Also, thank you to India. India is a talented cartoonist. You can find her work at Old Swifty on Twitter. Also, another cartoonist, Becca Hilburn. Thank you, Becca, for supporting the show. You can find Becca's work at Natto Soup. Also does a lot of YouTube streams. Catherine Sugru at Cat, SOOGROO. Thank you, Catherine, for supporting the show. and Ashley Knapp, beloved friend of the show. Ashley Knapp has been on the show before. You can find her at Control Alt Lee on Twitter. Thank you to everybody who has supported us on Patreon, and if you want to consider supporting us there, you go to patreon.com/leanintoart. There you will find the shows that we produce, but also the show that is only for Patreon supporters, and that is the Extra Lean Show, which used to be public. Now, as you can see right there, it's a private show just for Patreon supporters as our thank you to you guys.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and as a private show, it has this extra benefit of it's like a little mini discussion forum every month just for the patrons. And yeah, it's we super appreciate your support. And when you do that kind of thing, or if you're like on the fence thinking like, why would I do that kind of thing? I'm, maybe I have $1 or $2 a month, but I'm like, man, why? Well, it's because you're throwing in your vote saying like, yeah, this podcast should exist. And we can't all invent the internet, but you have the option to just give that sort of signal to say, please do more of this stuff.
We can't all invent the internet, but we can see that it keeps on trucking. Support Lean Into Art at patreon.com/leanintoart.
Right on.
All right. So what was your question? Your question was like, how do you make a defensible hypothesis of these are the tools that are necessary to make this project go?
Yeah. I mean, so it's almost like in a way, it reminds me of if you come up with sort of a style guide or sort of you've got goals for the project, and then these different visual and aesthetic and technique and tool choices all feed into like, well, these are elements, and you're saying like these elements in this set, this is how I will, accomplish what I believe needs to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you like when are they all there? How do you know that? And and like what projects, like, do you feel like, what, this project, it needs a little more specifying, right, for some of these aesthetic things?
I think for me, it's easier when it's client-based work because I have a clear audience to begin some assumptions about and interview people about, right? So I just recently got back from an interview with teachers about the next Captain Seriously book that I'm going to be working on, to talk to them about like, what are your students dealing with? What are the situations they're finding themselves in? What kind of experiences are they going to be having this year? What are some of the big like milestones that they look forward to, and what are the different kinds of like cultural things happening? Collect all those notes, and that gives me lots of material to decide what visual style to use, what kind of story to write, and how it should end. Right? Can I end it ambiguously? Does it need to end patly? And so on. What kind of relationships can I explore in it? When I'm doing my own personal work, then I feel like I'm operating on a lot more assumptions. I'm imagining an audience, and one of the members of that audience is me. Right? What's appealing to me? But then, and I'm going to throw this out and see if anybody else feels this way. If it's appealing to me, does that mean it's going to be appealing to anybody else? I don't know. I've told plenty of jokes that I laugh at, and nobody else in the room thinks is very funny. I've had that experience quite a bit. So, not to say that I don't trust my own taste, but, there's a moment where, like, after that initial delight of throwing the idea down, I go, well, but is it good? I don't know. So then, you pitch it at trusted friends and so on. Or another thing that I've done is I've, made up an imaginary client, a persona. We've talked about this before on the show, have we not?
We have. Yeah, personas have come up a few times.
You want to explain that concept? Since, this comes up a lot in your field, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in the field of user experience and, making services, designing businesses and whatever software, that kind of thing, a persona, there are different flavors. So you can come up with marketing personas, and they're sort of demographic based. We're trying to reach people between ages, 21 and 24, and we believe this or that based on our research, and here's what we have to do. that's interesting and has benefit. The kind of personas I tend to find uh, easier to make design choices about are behavioral, right? So it's sort of the what phenomena can I observe about um, a person in the world, and then summarize that as this general persona. I've seen enough people do this thing where it's like, um, this is this project. This comic, it has to be released 3 times a day because it's all about getting likes on Instagram from people who are highly into um, plants and whatever. And um, I've seen this community where it's like hashtag funny plant, right? And I think we can serve this group because they um, we've got a lot of whatever. We've got a lot of plant humor. We've got these botanists who have been dying for for joke telling, whatever. Anyway, so like you're looking at let's see, the persona helps bridge your goals on your project. Like, what do you want to achieve, and like what does this persona want, right? And then this is a way of bridging those two things, of saying like, well, we can meet those wants and behaviors based on doing this with our project. Mm.
Okay,
But
so now let me come back. Let's round back on one of the lead-in questions for this section, because Victor's in the chat and says, like, what is your voice is a great question, and that's kind of what we were getting at when we said, like, forming a defensible hypothesis for a thing. How do you defend that these are the things that need to come together to make this thing? And what, in other words, how do you determine what style is appropriate for the project, and what do you bring to it? Because like even like I was comparing that, Captain Seriously book that I did just last year to something I was doing in 1996, and I can see the similarities between the two pieces, even though there's 20 years between them.
mhm.
What you just described sounds utterly mechanical. It sounds like there's no spark of creativity in there whatsoever. I'm just going to enslave myself to a group and submit my art to them and design it to just appeal to them, and none of myself is in it whatsoever.
Hmm. So, have you ever been to a restaurant where the um the wait staff is sort of, they're just mm, they're just funny and on, and you feel a little bit out of your comfort zone where it's like, wow, you just sat right next to me. But sure, I'll tell you what's up and what I'm in, like what I would like, and have a conversation. So like, how you go about doing the thing, there's a lot of leeway for
Yeah.
for um for your voice, and in the how definitely is being shaped um on purpose by these other concerns, because that's the project aspect of your voice. Maybe is there a difference between, well, you purposefully get more um prescriptive and targeted with aspects of how you go about a thing, mixing it with, then you just, when you execute, there's variety and expression, and there's that, but on a particular project. But then wouldn't can't that show across multiple efforts?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
is
I
it, or
think.
does it become that invisible? Can you actually ever become a robot?
I mean, like when you watch an animated feature, it'd be hard to say like, well, you know what? I bet you a seasoned animator probably could say like, oh, that was animated by so and so, because you can tell because of the way they do this particular thing. There's like a flourish here or a twist there, and that's their hallmark, right?
Hmm.
Um, I feel like I'm reminded again of that old quote. It's like your style is what you do wrong. Your style is your idiosyncrasies. It's not just what you do wrong, but I think it's like things that you perform repetitively. Like for instance, I think a staple of my style of comic storytelling is that I really, really like giving characters reasons to argue with one another, because it's a nice, expedient way to reveal things about their characters, right? Um,
Hmm.
so even though this eighth grade book that I did is visually, as you described it, foggy, um, it features a lot of characters yelling at each other. uh, there's a lot of like bickering back and forth, right?
Hmm.
So that's just like a speedy way for me to like get at what a character is about. But also, you know, I would also point out other things like in terms of like body language, positioning, viewing angle, right? And like so. Okay, here's a perfect example. When I was working on the Warren Commission report, which you can buy at bookstores now, it's from Abrams Comic Arts. It's a documentary about the Kennedy assassination, which I worked on with my friend Dan Mishkin and legendary cartoonist Ernie Cologne. Dream Project. Um, I collaborated with Ernie on the art, and I had to, as his support artist, I had to sort of submit to his visual vocabulary, which meant that I had to sit and really study hard. Like, how does Ernie compose shots? How does Ernie compose a page? And sort of infer from the pieces he was giving me how to arrange that so it feels essentially Ernie-ish. You know, it's not going to feel totally Ernie because I'm contributing, but you know, get it close to it. And something that Dan Mishkin said to me that was like really just spot on and super insightful is he said, you know, Ernie tends to shoot all of his comics panel shots on the horizontal. Everything's horizontally oriented. He doesn't do down shots. He doesn't do up shots. Everything's horizontal. And so to which my response was, well, how do you show depth then? And I looked carefully again at Ernie's work and like, oh, he does it with layering elements. So he creates a sense of depth by positioning things one in front of the other, creating that sort of perspective rather than a three-dimensional perspective shot. Um, so that would be part of Ernie's voice is the kinds of shots he chose, which in studying that and adhering to that, um, it influenced my style as well because I started using more overlap in my later work. So, in harmonizing with Ernie's voice, I found new notes to hit with my own voice, if that makes sense.
It really does. And the dynamic you're describing where I suppose there is, let's see, like when is it your music and when are you a performing musician?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
um the concept of ownership can have a lot of influence depending on your relationship with it. And so if you're doing a project for a client and depending on the kind of influence and voice the client has, that has an element of it where, okay, a persona actually can be a very expedient way to agree upon common criteria and evaluate what comes out, where it's like, well, this does seem in the light of the persona like it's going to meet our goals, right? It's maybe not what you assumed, but okay, okay, you can have agreement and collaborative alignment to move forward on a thing. But then if you mentioned okay, working with like a lead artist or a lead designer on a thing, and or depending on the client, there may be an established, highly prescribed voice
hmm
that, well, maybe you're doing work that's for a licensed character
right.
or
Which
you're, yeah.
I should have grabbed some examples of that. Yeah, because years ago when I did some work for the Marvel Superhero Squad card game, I remember like, you know, it's they had a they had a style guide. You know, characters this many heads high. This is the look that they should have. These are the colors you should use. You know, um,
Hmm.
although I could still, when I look at the ones that I did, I can see elements of my visual style. So Victor's asking in the chat again: is it possible that we're confusing style with form? I don't know. I don't know because like what I'm talking about here when I say I did an Ant Man card and it was Ant Man like doing equations on like a billboard on the side of the road. You know, and he had like train tracks as a ruler and a tree as a pencil kind of thing. Um, and there was something about the pose and the energy of the body language that I felt like registered as totally me, although the visual look of the character I felt was consistent with their style guide, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I'm talking about. Talking about like the weird. What do we mean by form? I guess is what I'm confused about, Victor. Because when I'm thinking of form, I'm thinking of I don't know. I don't know. What do
So
you?
I mean, yeah, I maybe posture, volume, the shape and composition. Like a particular form could be, could, like you were describing, dictate proportion or perspective and whatnot. But even
Yeah.
like describing what form might possibly mean, there are a lot of variables and there's a subjectivity. So essentially, there was probably on that particular project someone who was the art director or
Mm-hmm.
what have you that probably had some kind of sign off on accepting work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is an interpreted thing. So whatever they, I mean, because we're talking at this point in time, we don't have the um, a machine learning algorithm dictating if your work is accepted or not for a contract.
Right.
Yeah, and so that the criteria does have a fuzziness to it, even if it sounds authoritatively clear, right? So essentially, it's a dialogue between you and, in that situation, a client that is like a gatekeeper, and um, it. I would imagine it depends because there's probably cards that are a little bit, you know, have a bit more leeway than other cards.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine.
Um, and I guess like for the purposes of my part of this conversation, I'm describing style as like a little bit more of a fuzzier and all-encompassing thing. Like so, when I think of somebody like a Chris Giarrusso who has a cartoony style, there are elements to his approach to his art that I think have to do with the way he composes figures and the way he composes his light and shadow balance, the way he does his text to image ratio, and ways in the angles at which he constructs his characters that I think have less to do with the cartooniness and more to do with like his his visual vocabulary, the way he expresses an idea visually. I would consider that part of his style, not just the pure surface level aesthetics of it, right? Um, you
Yeah,
could
I
take
mean the subject matter and how we interpret it and put it in there has that there are likely more than one variable, right?
There's that
Because
famous image in How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way of the character and all the motions of a character punching, right?
mhm,
Like there's like in the bias of the book is that they propose that the wind up to the punch and the execution of the punch are the two most interesting parts of the motion because everything else in between is like um well it's in between, right? It's
mhm.
between the before and the after. Um that's neither here nor there. But what's interesting to me is that I think where the artist falls on that spectrum of what image they capture and what image to them represents the sort of mega image of something we talked about. And I'm talking about specifically about comics now. Um, how comics panels can comprise both before and after in the same image. Sometimes, like for instance, that page I showed you where like the character in panel one was talking through panels two, three, and four, you can have these sort of mega moments, and what part of those mega moments you choose and how you combine them, I think, is part of the artist's maybe narrative style, but it's also a visual style because it's a visual narrative. That was a long way around getting to that idea. I apologize, but
No, it's there are many angles to tackle this, and it does depend on the project. Is it an interactive project like a web thing, or is it a like data visualization? Is it a game? Is it a comic? And is it a for any of those? It's like, well, then what is the sort of uh, genre or audience, celebrated particular set of aesthetic elements that would help, that are whoever is, because in some ways we're deciding like who is either individually prescribing what is the strong hypothesis versus is it a collective one, right? Or is
mm,
it sort of a shared dialogue between you and someone hiring you to do that thing, right?
right,
Or you and someone who you are hiring to do that thing, or just you.
yeah. But to go back to the thing, the example that you were talking about where it's like, oh, there's these people who are like really into this particular topic on Instagram, we got to make something that updates twice a day. That creates a sort of system of constraints to help you choose tools and also visual look, right? Well, if I've got to do this twice a day and if I'm only getting paid this much, this is the maximum amount of detail execution that you can get, right? Um, So I have an example to that effect of how like my exploration of that led to a dead end. If you want to talk about that,
Mm, yeah. What?
and then I'm going to
What
respond to some more
specifics?
comments in the chat. So here's an example where, and this is right after I got that Galaxy Note 10.1, which I was so excited about, and I still have it, and I still use it to sketch. If anybody was wondering, it was an Android tablet that you could draw on, and it had pressure sensitivity with a Wacom digitizer on it. Very exciting. This is long before the Surface Pros came out, and then leading that whole revolution. But I was using a $10 Android app called Layer Paint HD, and I asked myself, can I do a high resolution, full color kids comic entirely on this tablet, on this less than 1 pound Android tablet? That would be a very compelling idea. As I started to play with it, so like I started with a few constraints. Like obviously I can't do like super detailed perspective work because Layer Paint HD for all of its affordances didn't have like really terrific perspective rulers. So I was like, well, the backgrounds are gonna have to be very freehand. You could see that I chose a very simple illustration style for the backgrounds, right?
Hmm.
And the characters will have very minimal rendering, so I'll stay very cartoony and very light. This, by the way, this is for a Captain Cat story that I don't know if I'm ever going to finish, but maybe someday. But I did play with like trying to play with some of the painting tools in it to see what kind of effects I could get. You can see there the moonlight cruise to the
Hmm.
island.
It's
Um,
very textured. This was all done on that Android tablet.
yep.
Wow.
And but so as I was pushing how far I could go with it, I was running into problems where it just didn't have the RAM to support the amount of layers that I wanted to use to do this.
Mm.
And so I wound up having to save multiple versions of each page where here's a version of the page where panel 1 is colored and layered, save that, then flatten all the colors in panel 1, color panel 2, save a layered version of that, flatten panel 2, color panel 3, save a layered version of that, flatten panel 3, and so on. So it'd be like,
Wow.
so this particular page has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. There's 7 versions of the page saved. So if I decided after the fact, like, oh, I want to change some things in panel 1, I have to go find the panel 1 version of the page. That became unmanageable, and I was like, okay, I reached the dead end of this. The constraints are such that, as much as I would like to, I can't efficiently make a comic. And I actually wanted to do like 6 pages of this comic. Here's where I ended with these ghosts talking on an island. But yeah, so the visual style was chosen with the constraints of the technology in mind, but then I reached an endpoint where I couldn't go any further with that, right?
Well, right. And so it was informed by the technology, but it seems like you were experimenting with something that was not just informed by the technology. You had an aesthetic that was um almost like a what if I could go further than this seems obviously capable of, right?
Yeah.
So there's um,
So if
a
I
lot of
were to
experimenting.
say, so at this point, then perhaps the decision is like, okay, well, clearly I'm asking more visually than what this can perform. So what if I simplify it? Let's dial it back. Let's go even simpler.
Mhm.
Then could I pull it off, right? Um, and perhaps I could if I wasn't asking so much of the. I said like I don't have to have like 5 layers in each panel, right?
Yeah. There's a koala bear with an axe, a koala bear lumberjack.
Yeah, it was a koala bear lumberjack and a
Ah,
delicatessen owning dinosaur ghost. Um,
wow.
there was
Now I
actual stir.
see I see the dinosaur's deli hat.
Yeah, in
That's
an apron.
oh my. So
There was anyway. Um,
oh man. What? Okay. Okay. I this is a I want to read this now.
sorry, that's where it ended. I only got 6 pages in. Maybe I'll redraw it someday. That's actually quite old now, but yeah, I just pulled those up when I was digging through old art, trying to figure out like what experiments have I done in playing with different visual
Mhm.
looks. Um, and like doing the backgrounds that loose was unusual for me. Okay, so Victor's got a follow up question. I wanna see if we can tackle this, and maybe this could even be final thought, Rob.
Hmm.
Uh, Perhaps we'll see. Victor asks, tomorrow someone asks you to make a children's comic and we see something totally different then. Has the style changed or has the shape changed? Shape.
Hmm. Uh Has the style changed or the shape changed? Huh. What what do you think, Jersey?
I don't know. I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Um, because if and shadowing Troy Shadowing Tronics is bringing to the chat is like Kim Holm once did a dark story in a more cartoony light style and it somehow worked. So yeah, so uh,
Oh,
I think
interesting.
I
There's
think
a
I
lot
see
of
what this.
audience in this thing where, like, I've seen some folks react in a very negative way with a juxtaposition of style, right? Where
Yeah.
it's like, I've got cartoony, but I've got gritty, and I have abstract, but I have concrete, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, this is I feel like I'm someone who would react negatively to that, but yet I've come across stories that I've referred to this before, but Captain Harlock's Endless Odyssey is full of these kind of juxtapositions, and to me they're very convincing, totally work. Where
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
I
where you
mean,
have
you
like
have
a
characters
very
with anatomy that are just very cartoony anatomy,
yeah.
and then characters that are more um, there's almost like, I don't know, three primary ways where characters are expressed. There's almost like this um, exaggerated anime aesthetic thing, and then there's more of a like common humanoid um, a, mm, a like more physiologically a more accurate way of representing humans and, you know, with lines. But then there's the more totally blown out Popeye looking
Mhm.
extreme interpretation, and they all coexist. Anyway, like, I've come across stories like that where it's like, okay, this is cool. Or like, for instance, with Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, there is a juxtaposition of high technology and fantasy
Mhm.
kind of thing. I honestly, sometimes it would seem, if I would assume I would be annoyed by the juxtaposition, but like, it really, that's not a problem for me. I think I'm learning.
Mhm.
And it's, I suppose it's when I've bought in and find the tension and energy between these different things. Um, it's exciting, not frustrating, not distracting.
Well, to be fair to Victor, he's correcting or clarifying his question and saying, is the style changed or the form changed? We're coming back to this again, the difference between style and form. Like when does I'm going to attempt to interpret your question a little bit, Victor. So like if I'm hired to do a children's comic and I do it in a style that one would not expect for a children's comic, has the or have I do it in a visual vocabulary that one does not automatically assume, like smooth cartoony, like I was talking about earlier with the Captain Seriously book. If I did something like the eighth grade book for kids, has the form changes? Is it no longer a children's comic by virtue of the fact that like the visual vocabulary is totally different? Oh, that would be something I would. I feel like that's outside of my above my pay grade, as they say. It'd be something for a lot of different people to debate, um, and it'd be open for interpretation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think primarily, yes, it is. And it could be due to culture or just taste, learning style. It just, and it's really in the eye of the beholder, as far as because you have the goals of the creator. You have, is the creator like a super creator where it's made up of people who are funding or as a patron or a client, and maybe people who have specified aspects because the client has hired more than one. There's a designer or an art director, and then also someone creating whatever that is. You have, you've got the creative collective intent and execution, but then you've got how does it meet the audience? Because inherently, if you aren't testing these different things at least a little bit along the way with the real people out in the world, then that you're trying to serve, um, it's tough to say. Like I know, like, it looked like you pulled up a page from the Captain Seriously eighth grade level book, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and did you do a little bit of hey, sneak peek to
Oh,
the audience?
yeah. No, that's a good point. Yes, we did. Jesse and I actually gave an early draft of the book to some kids who would be reading the final copy, and we got their feedback, and found out what they were responding to, what they felt was strong, and there was actually a question from a couple of the kids like, I didn't quite understand this part of the book, and so Jesse and I went back and looked at it and said, okay, well, what aren't they getting? We get it. What aren't they getting? Okay, well, this needs more clarification. So we modified the book based on their feedback. Not exactly the same thing as focus grouping, but sort of getting reactions from the specific people we're trying to help.
Allow me to take a brief moment on focus groups versus usability testing. Focus group data, near garbage. Pretty much throw your time out the window. If you enjoy doing that as a pastime, great. But like, if you want to have information that can inform what you do next with your project, don't put people together and test it, because people affect people. If you're like, hi everybody, I'm Jersey Droz and this is my comic, whatever, it's on the screen. One person claps, two other people might clap because they think that person's cool. You got nothing from that.
Yeah.
And but if you're like, hi, there's a book, and now you capture people's reaction to it, either directly there or do you wait and you survey or whatever, that's a lot more information and signal of a higher quality. Because
okay, and here's another way to like approach that question. Is it also depends on what you're like, something you said earlier, Rob. It depends on what your goals are. So here's the bad guy in this 8th grade book, who is this creepy sort of like, he's exaggerated in weird ways. This character, and he was purposefully designed to be a little unnerving, right? He's supposed to look a little bit closer to horror than to comical bad guy. Right?
Yeah.
But that's not to say that such a character doesn't belong in children's fiction, right? When I think of the movie Spirited Away and I think of No Face, he was a truly frightening monster in the bathhouse scene when he goes crazy and starts eating everybody.
He goes out of control in a grotesque manner.
And that was the point. It was supposed to be, it was purposefully frightening. So did it stop being a children's movie? Certainly not. It was definitely a children's fairy tale movie, but it just had a different purpose, right?
So your philosophy as a creator and how you interpret playing with and against people's expectations and their psychology and their what they would tell you is good, that's your palette and that your creative voice like may be about creating a super moment at the right times in a story, and that has a certain amount of effort that can be really rewarding, and you're looking for someone or to resonate with, with an audience that's willing to just go a little bit further. Like, did you make it safe for them, right? Did you do enough where they're bought in, and it's like now they're lifting that effort of like the super moment, and you're going to reward them and pay it off, and that's your voice. And so that's that. I mean, some of that is really like your heuristics in your beliefs.
Yeah, and that's part of your style too.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get to final thought. We're going to cook up a final thought in this whole thing and tie it all together somehow. Oh, well, we never did answer the question, is it even worth looking for a style if your style is what you do wrong? And is it worth fighting for a style to make yourself marketable? Maybe we can thrash around with that one very quickly at the end.
Sure.
So easygoing, Rob. Sure, but I might not.
Yep.
Okay. But first, we got to thank some other people who make the show possible, and those people happen to be us. We make other things too, so it's like perhaps we should have started out the episode by talking about what we do in order to give ourselves credentials. But you know what? We'd rather just get to the point and make the thing first, and then if you're still here, say, oh, by the way, here's some stuff to back up our claims that we actually make stuff, and think hard about the stuff that we make. I make a webcomic called Boulder and Fleet Adventures for Hire, which you can find at boulderandfleet.com. The current story is almost wrapped up. actually a few more weeks to go on, a friendly game where our heroes are trapped in a cafe while a living mulch is trying to slowly dissolve everybody inside. And poor Fleet just discovered that she has to save everybody with a bag of rotting vegetables and poo. And you can find it at boulderandfleet.com, on Instagram at boulderandfleet, on Twitter at boulderandfleet. And if you really want to get some behind the scenes stuff and you really want to support me in my endeavors, you can go to my Patreon and support the comic there. It's at patreon.com/Jersey. Rob, you make a game.
I do. And your your current storyline inspires me to make it about sympathy for a dung beetle, right? But like what I actually made for now is a game called This Panda Needs You, and it was co-designed with my wife Kate. And because why did Kate co-design this? Because stacking shapes is fun. It's a great learning experience for the young ones who are into pattern matching and hand-eye coordination on like a tablet, right? And this is it's so what it ends up being for all ages. It's a mellow game where you're helping a panda who encounters a pattern of shapes that are stacked up, and a cloud comes along and knocks them all over, and you're there to put things right again. And that's what this panda needs you for. So you can help this panda through like more than 50 different levels and patterns that that are there for you, that grow and challenge. And it's it's you're dealing with physics, so you got to stack the stuff up, and it's easy to sort of, as there's more shapes and things to manage, you can knock it over. So there's a lot of there's a building skill curve as you go. Anyway, if you're into that kind of thing, check out this-panda.com and go to the iTunes App Store, where you can get This Panda Needs You for both iPhone and iPad. And of course, it's a universal app, so you buy it once and it works in both.
Oh, that's awesome. But if you are here because you like the stuff we think about rather than the stuff we make, and that's perfectly awesome, because this is another thing that we make, actually. But if this is the flavor of stuff that we make that you really appreciate, then we would encourage you to go to leadintoart.com/workshops, where you can download videos that we make, like video workshops that we've produced over the years. You can download them at a price of your choosing, even free. There's comics workshops there, there's UI workshops there, and making video games workshops there. And then if you've already done that and you're like, hey, I've already downloaded your guys' workshops, what more do you want from me? A thing you could do for free right now is you go to iTunes or whatever podcatcher you use and give the show a star rating. A 5-star rating would be really nice. That helps more people discover the show. Or if you're watching this on YouTube right now, giving the video a thumbs up helps more people find the show. YouTube is a pretty important search engine. And the more people that discover the show, the more people can support the show, the more it can become a sustainable thing. And we thank everybody who has interacted with our stuff or supported us by spreading the word about the show or downloading our workshops. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
All right, final thought time. And by the way, thanks to everybody in the chat tonight who's been, contributing. Victor and Troy, and it's awesome to get some interaction with you guys while we do the show live. That's why we do it live, is in the hopes that people will play along with us. So,
yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so the thing we were going to chew on for final thought.
Yeah. Is it something that we should fight for to develop a sort of a marketable, I'm the guy or gal who's all about this, When you think of this, you think of me. And perhaps I'm biasing my question by even using that tone of voice. I didn't mean to use a funny voice with it, but summing yourself up in this neat little package with this is my particular style. I remember that was so important to me when I was young. And as I get older, it's so much less important to me. I don't know if that's a function of or a result of knowing what that style is, right? So I don't have to make a point about it anymore. I don't know. Or is it just not as interesting to me? I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I mean, I honest to goodness have not thought about this question until you proposed this as a topic. Then when I looked in the mirror, I was like, I don't know why it's not as important to me anymore.
Yeah, and that's where it's the question, if you look at it as a project by project kind of thing, I think it adds a bit of context where, okay, you are being I mean, depending on what you're being brought in to do for a project, if you're doing the colors or the lettering or the, like pencils or the inks, or, I mean, there may be some componentized aspect that you're only responsible for. And, um, well, that's really going to be, really strongly influenced by the other collaborators on the project. But like, either way, like a project has its particular, shape, intent, what is making it successful or not. And then it's like, well, you over time across multiple projects and things you've made, like, well, if your voice is just this accidental thing, how can you, you know what's the value in why worry about it, right?
Mm.
um I think it's a matter of, there's a bias that I know I have, and totally admit that the more I try to have some understanding over time, even if I didn't understand at the time, because I'm reflecting and observing, um, there was probably some reason at the time, but then what emerged from it? Like if I look at, especially when I look at a project like Art Geek Zoo, and let's see, am I particularly worried about voice? Not really, until I want to get hired for a thing. And I'm either asking an individual to be where I'm the person who can help them bring about the thing that they wish to bring about because they've got funding and I'm here to help. Or, that's one way to be concerned about. Yeah, I need to be able to convey like what I do and why I stand out as being well met with what they need. But then there's also like, I'm either looking for them to hire me, or in a way I'm looking for an audience to hire me, maybe, if I'm making a thing and sharing it with them. And so I, over time, do find benefit in thinking about the um that's why, like, I'm approaching my next projects more from a different approach, with projects like Art Geek Zoo and other comics that I worked on, like Babies Love Comics type things, um, and like little one-off things here and there. I'm not worried that like, can I deliver and whatnot. It's more, well, why am I doing this? Am I setting myself up to succeed? And I find value in thinking about that. So if I think it's like, well, if you find value in thinking about that and have enough information where it's not a frustrating exercise, like if I would have been doing this in the days of Art Geek Zoo, I it would have been a more frustrating exercise, especially early on, where I don't know if I could have landed on a thing, and that would have been distracting. So I just needed to get on with making it.
I liked some language you used early on in the episode where you said like using what feels right with what makes sense right now to do the thing. And then as your skill set grew, or rather, as you got more efficient at doing it, that time got filled in with new skill acquisition, right, and more experimentation.
Mhm.
And then I would argue that style just emerges naturally in that point.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, I'm really curious. Is there anything you wanted to dig into for that at all?
No, it's just it's something where it's like my personal standpoint on this is that it's um, in my experience and in the experience of working with young people for the last almost 10 years now, I've seen it happen again and again where that personal voice and approach and aesthetic emerges on its own just by virtue of doing it over and over again.
Hmm.
And it's both fed by influence, it's fed through the tools you use, it's fed through your personal experience and your worldview and the limitations of what you choose to take on. I would actually recommend anybody who's interested in the subject go subscribe to Brandon Dayton's YouTube channel because he talks about this kind of stuff all the time. About
Mm.
like there's points you get to where you realize you see an artist who you admire and you're like, okay, I see how I can get to that level by applying myself in this direction over this amount of time. Right. So it's not a matter of like, I can't draw this. It's that you see that there's places where it's like, oh, okay, this person clearly leveled up in that direction. If I put in the time, I could get into that particular direction. Right. Um, I think that also influences like what you choose to push your energy towards versus what you choose not to. Right. Uh,
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, what I'm hearing in what you're describing is your vocabulary is a factor where like you may become aware of it, and you may not have been able to be aware of it until you were practicing, and then now you can make better observations.
that feeds into the last comment I want to read from tonight, and this is Sean
Okay.
Wolf in the chat is saying, how do you become aware of your style? Does someone have to tell you what it is? Um, Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, like there's been times where friends of mine have pointed out to me, "Hey, Jersey, I would really like your help on this particular project because you were particularly good at X." And they just name something, and I go, "Really? Am I?" And I look at my work, I'm like, "Oh, I can see how you came to that conclusion. Okay, yeah, that's nice. Those three things I did over there." I wouldn't necessarily call myself an expert at it, but yes, it's something I pay attention to. Thank you. That's a very nice thing to say. Let's work together. So it can be something where a really nice friend highlights something that you do, repeatedly and hopefully well. Um, I think it's something that it's like it took me a long time to finally get to the point where I realized that like no, what my comfort zone. I don't want to say necessarily style, but where I'm happiest is when I'm drawing cute things being courageous. And even the Captain Seriously stuff is filled with cute characters who are being courageous. Even the 8th grade book has cute characters who are being courageous. Um, and all of my work is going to be flavored with that kind of outlook. The outlook that looks at an Ewok and says, like, I'm cool with that. I don't feel uncomfortable about that at all. Um, so that's something that I named. I kind of found that on my own, but it took a lot of practice to get to that. I didn't know what that was for a long time. So does that sound right, Rob? Both?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, in the absence of having any reaction to your work, and in the absence of doing your work in some kind of for trade to accomplish some goal or whatever, I mean, those are feedback loops that can give you perspective. The other place to get it is just like um, I've worked with creators in different mediums, like I mean, from guitarists to writers to artists that are so into critiquing their own stuff that they like because of this critiquing hyper focus and constant comparison and voracious consumption of other stuff and constant comparison, like they gain perspective through that. And that's I that is another approach. I think for me it's not as intense in that approach, and a little bit more in the I had some goals, I tried some things, what worked based on constraints, and also some reaction, and it's just yeah, a mix of those.
I think we walked around it enough for one night, Rob.
Yeah, totally. There's it can pretty much infinitely pull at this
Yeah,
thread.
yeah, we
So
can. Well, if there's
yeah,
enough interest, we'll do a follow up to this one. And I mean, this isn't the first time we've talked about style. It won't be the last.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. There are many angles to take.
but I want to thank everybody who participated in the chat tonight, hung out with us, and this show will be archived at leanintoart.com and patreon.com/leanintoart. Do consider supporting us there if you find this stuff useful. And we'll be back in a week with another episode. Until then, I have been Jersey Drozd of leanintoart.com and Jersey on Twitter.
And I am Rob Stenzinger of leanintoart.com and Rob Stenzinger on Twitter.
Okay, bye.
Show notes for this episode can be found at leanintoart.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at the user leanintoart, and you can reach us via email at leanintoart@gmail.com. And remember, leaners aren't wieners. Thanks for listening.
Shadowing Troy Shadowingtronics in the chat. He says critiquing others' work to make yours better. Shameless plug. Yes, do check out Shadowingtronics' site, guys, who are in the chat. And thank you, Jesse, for watching. I thought you might be there in the background.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out with us.
All right, I'm gonna shut off the stream. Good night, everybody.
Good night.